Hi, welcome back to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith. If you've picked up the Dust Warfare Core Rulebook, then you should also head over to the Fantasy Flight Games website, because they've released some frequently asked questions and answers and some corrections to the rulebook. There were a couple of units that had some incorrect stats on them, and they've updated those there. Now in this video series, I'm of course trying to incorporate all of those changes as well. In the last episode, we talked about units and movement. In this episode, we're going to talk about attacking. Previously, I mentioned that units take actions, and under ideal conditions, they can take two actions, one of which can be to attack. Your units also have a variety of weapons, and they may have both close combat weapons and ranged weapons. So the first decision you need to make when attacking is whether or not you're going to do close combat or ranged attacks, because a single unit doing an attack action can't do a mix of both. It has to commit to one or the other. Now, towards the end of this episode, we're going to talk about the rules for close combat. It's enough to know for now that if you want to do close combat, you have to be within 3 inches of the unit that you're targeting. But we're going to talk about ranged combat now. And when you do an attack with a unit with ranged combat, you have to first pick your targets. And a single unit can divide up its attack between multiple targets. So on the table, I have a unit of 3 Grim Reapers, and they want to split their attack between this unit of Laser Grenadiers and this unit of Axis Zombies. Now, it might be hard for you to see, but one of the members of this unit, the leader, is actually hiding behind this wall here. Now, before we roll any dice, we must declare which weapons in our unit are targeting which enemies. So to find out what weapon options we have, let's take a look in the book under the section for the Grim Reapers unit. So here's the section in the book for the Grim Reapers unit. Now towards the bottom we have some of their stats. There's their movement stat, that should be familiar to us now, but also they have this table here, and this defines the weapons that they're carrying. Let's take a closer look. The first item in the table gives you the name of the weapon, and also tells you how many of the models in the unit are carrying that weapon. For example, the rocket punch is being carried by all 3 of the models. And here's a good example of a small piece of information missing from the next weapon line. You can see here it tells you the name of the weapon, the Dual Cal Victory MG, but not how many of the units are carrying it, and it should say 3 here. And we can easily confirm this by looking at the models themselves. You can see they're all carrying the Dual Cal Victory MGs. The next item shows the range of the weapon. The rocket punch is a close range weapon, and we know that close combat range is 3 inches. For the MGs, we can see that they have a range of 16 inches. Now, the rest of the table looks like a lot of numbers, but it's very easy to understand, and we'll look at it in a moment. So, I've pre-measured 3 inches here, and you can see there's no way these guys can do close combat with these targets. However, if I extend it to 16 inches, the range for their guns, no trouble reaching any of the targets that they want to fire at. And remember, you can always pre-measure before declaring your targets. Now that the range is taken care of, we have to check line of sight. And remember what I said, it doesn't matter what direction the actual model is facing. It can always attack in any direction. Now, I like to turn my models towards the target, but that's just for dramatic effect. Some models, like vehicles, depending on the weapon they're using, the direction they're facing can have an impact. For example, the F next to this weapon equipped to the Lothar vehicle means that it can only fire into its front arc. So as long as at least one model in the unit being attacked is within that 90-degree arc, that unit can then be attacked. Now remember, I said I want to split up my attack. So this model here and this model here is going to attack the Laser Grenadiers. And then this model here is going to attack the zombies. Now to determine line of sight, we need to look from the model's point of view, at the highest point at the center of the model. So checking these 2 Grim Reapers, remember there's a hidden model behind this wall, so they don't have line of sight to it. However, they can see all 4 of the other models in the unit. As long as a model can see at least one model in the target unit, then that attacking model can contribute its weapons to the attack. Looking at the 3rd Grim Reaper here, you can see it has no line of sight to any of the models in that Laser Grenadier unit, so it can't attack them. And that's why I'm having this Grim Reaper attack the zombies instead. Because although they are partially hidden behind the trees, as long as you can see some part of the model, you have line of sight to it. So now we know the unit has legal attacks it can make, but although it can see the enemy, we don't know if it has a clean shot. So now we need to check and see if the enemy can take advantage of cover. Now this is even easier to track because instead of doing it model by model, as we did when checking for range and for line of sight, instead we're going to look at this from the perspective of the leader model only. So you got to think of your leader as directing the attacks of your unit, and so his position on the board is very important. Now we're going to be drawing an imaginary line from the very center of the leader's base to the center of each model's base in the unit being attacked. If that line crosses any form of terrain before touching the target's base, then the model is considered to be obscured. So drawing a line from this model to this model, we can see we've crossed these barrels. This is a form of terrain, so line of sight to this model is obscured, whereas line of sight to these three models is not. Now, this model, which we saw was totally blocked and no part of it can be seen, for the purposes of checking cover, we say it's also obscured. If at least half of the models in the unit being attacked are obscured, they will gain the benefits of cover. Now, in this case, only 2 of the models were obscured out of the total 5, so they will not be gaining the benefits of cover. But let's take a look at the zombies. In this case, the leader's line crosses these trees to all of the zombies, so this unit will gain the benefit of cover. The only terrain you don't factor in is any that the leader is currently in or touching. So as an example, let's say that this wall was touching the leader's base. Again, because the leader is touching that piece of terrain, it does not count as obscuring line of sight. Instead, if the wall was here, because the leader is no longer touching it, it is now considered to be obscuring line of sight to these zombies. Just a couple quick notes about this. Models in the same unit do not obscure the view to other models in that same unit. So the leader drawing a line in this direction, although it passes through this zombie first, is not obscuring the view to this zombie. That said, models from other enemy units that might be in front do obscure the view. So just consider the base of the model like a cylinder up to the height of the miniature. And so if a line passes through that, that's considered as passing through terrain. Now, one exception to this is if the intervening unit has a suppression token. Suppression is something we'll discuss in a later episode, but basically a suppressed unit has hit the dirt. They're ducking, they're trying to find cover, so they're not blocking anybody. Also, friendly models don't obscure enemy models either. Now, if the attacker is a vehicle, no soldier models are going to provide cover regardless of what team they're on. Basically, soldiers can only provide obscurity for other soldiers. Now that said, vehicles, on the other hand, certainly do provide terrain cover. So this vehicle or these models trying to shoot at the zombies have to treat the base of this vehicle as terrain, meaning that these models would be obscured. Now, speaking of vehicles, when checking to see if a vehicle will benefit from cover, you draw your imaginary line from the center of your leader towards the vehicle as normal. But then draw the line to any part of the vehicle's base. And if you can find a line that does not cross terrain, then that vehicle does not benefit from cover. And this makes sense because vehicles are big machines, and they can't move around and duck behind cover like a soldier could. And now the best part, we get to roll some dice. Models in the attacking unit that have range and line of sight to the target unit are able to contribute dice, but we also need to know the unit type and armor rating for the unit being attacked. So looking at the stats for the Laser Grenadiers, we can see that they are a soldier type, that's what this symbol represents, and they are an armor rating of 2. And to save some time, we'll look at the zombies as well, and these, same thing, soldier type, armor rating 2. Now if your target was showing this symbol, it would mean it's a vehicle type. There's also aircraft types as well, but in the core rulebook, there are no aircraft, so we don't have to worry about that. So now we're back at the page for the Grim Reapers, and we need to look at the weapon stats once again for the Dual Cal Victory MG. So now we look in the soldier section, which represents our target, and then rating 2, which was the Laser Grenadier's armor rating. If we come down to the weapon we're shooting with, we see that we roll 4 attack dice, and then each hit will do 1 damage. So 4 is the number of dice, and 1 is the amount of damage per hit. So a Victory MG lets us roll 4 dice. but we're firing 2 of them, so that's a total of 8 dice. Now, if you were attacking with 2 different weapons that had 2 different levels of damage, then you'd want to roll them separately. But since these weapons, of course, do the same amount of damage, we can roll all 8 dice together. Let's see what we get. And there you have it. 4 hits. So now what we need to do is convert those hits into damage. And we know each hit gives us 1 point of damage. So that's 4 potential points of damage. I say potential damage because now my opponent needs to make an armor roll to see if the armor that his unit is wearing can absorb some of this damage. So we have to go back to that unit's armor rating. You remember the Laser Grenadiers have an armor rating of 2. That means they get to roll 2 dice, and every hit rolled negates 1 point of damage. So as a reminder, here are the 4 potential points of damage. Now I'm going to make that armor roll. And look at that, a perfect roll for them. So these 2 hits now negate or take away 2 points of the damage, meaning my Grim Reapers will now only inflict a total of 2 damage against the Laser Grenadiers. And now it's up to the defending player to assign that damage to the unit. There are a couple of restrictions. Models that are not obscured must be assigned damage before models that are obscured, and models in a unit that had line of sight totally blocked from all of the attackers cannot take damage from an attack. So this model, the leader hiding behind the building here, cannot be assigned any damage. And these models here must be assigned damage before this model because this model is obscured and these ones are out in the open. So looking at the stats for the Laser Grenadiers one more time, down here we can see their health. This is how much damage each model in the unit can take before being removed from the game. As you can see, it's just 1. So the time of reckoning is here. The defender assigns 1 point of damage to this model, removes it from the game, and then assigns this point of damage to this model and removes it from the game. Now, as a final step, after the damage is assigned, if at least 1 potential hit was rolled, then we add a suppression token to the unit. So even if all of the potential damage is blocked by armor, absorbed by cover, we're going to see cover in a moment, as long as at least 1 hit was originally rolled, that unit is still going to take a suppression token. It's as if the gunfire itself is causing the unit to duck down and look for cover. Now, what about those zombies? Well, let's take a quick look. So this time we only have 1 attacker. That means 4 dice only. This time we have 2 potential hits. So we'll just put these aside. Now the zombies, we remember, they have the same armor rating of 2. So we're going to be rolling 2 dice for them. Let's see if they roll any hits. 1 hit. So 1 hit will block 1 potential point of damage. That means we have 1 point of damage going through. But this time the targeted unit, these zombies here, are behind the cover of trees. The rules tell us there are 2 different kinds of cover, soft cover and hard cover. Soft cover would be things like trees, bushes, fences, wooden crates, barrels, that kind of thing. And then hard cover would be like the side of a building, a vehicle, being down in the trenches. It's a really good idea for players to decide before the game begins which elements are soft cover and hard cover if they think there's going to be any disagreement. Soft cover provides the player with 1 automatic success in addition to their armor roll. So this means that in addition to the armor roll that allowed me to take away 1 of these potential damage points, the soft cover will remove the other one. And then hard cover is automatic 2 successes in addition to your armor roll. But don't forget, even though they didn't take any damage, there were potential hits rolled against them, and that means they'll have to take a suppression token. Now here's a couple of quick little rules. If more than half of an attacking unit's bases are fully in the rear arc of a vehicle, the vehicle cannot make an armor roll. But it can still benefit from cover bonuses. Basically, the backs of the vehicles do not have as much protective armor as their fronts. Some units, especially the 2 model ones, like our sniper and spotter here, they have an ability called team, and this means they're better at using cover, which clearly these are. They're like ninjas in these trees. And that means that they get to upgrade soft cover to hard cover. Also, units that have a suppression token, like our poor Laser Grenadiers over here, they're ducking for cover, so you upgrade their cover status 1 step. So if a suppressed unit was in no cover, it gets upgraded to soft cover. And if it was in soft cover, it gets upgraded to hard cover. And if it's in hard cover, it's already in hard cover, so nothing happens. Now, vehicles are a little bit different. When potential hits are rolled against vehicles, they don't take suppression tokens because they're not going to dive to the ground or hide behind a tree. That would just be ridiculous. Instead, you're going to do a second roll against them. So what you need to do is add up all of the potential damage that was rolled against that vehicle, and then take that number of dice and subtract from it any cover dice that were removed. So if it was in soft cover, you'd take 1 die away. If it was in hard cover, you'd take 2 dice away from that. What you don't subtract from that is any armor dice that were rolled. So you're thinking of all the potential damage that was put against it, even damage that was absorbed by the armor. That number is how many dice you're going to roll, and then you're going to consult the vehicle damage table. So here's the vehicle damage table. Now let's say 3 hits were rolled against the vehicle, and that turned into 6 potential points of damage. But the vehicle was in hard cover, so we remove 2 of the potential points of damage. And let's say that the vehicle also did an armor roll that would have prevented 1 damage point. You don't take away the armor roll, so we still have 4 potential points of damage. We're going to roll 4 dice against this table, and based on the number of hits we roll, different various bad things are going to happen to that vehicle. One thing to keep in mind, certain units, especially vehicles and heroes, can take multiple wounds before they're removed from the board. So what I like to do is when one of those units takes a wound, I'll put a red token beside it to keep track of its current health. If you also want to make combat a little bit easier, again I have to recommend these custom unit cards that you can print out. I talked about these in the first episode. They're great because they have all the weapon stats here and all the stats for the unit that's attacking and potentially defending. So it means no more page flipping when you're doing combat. Now, before we wrap up, I'd like to tell you how close combat works. Some of your models, as I mentioned before, have ranged weapons and close combat weapons. If you decide to do close combat, you'll only be using the close combat weapons. And there's a few rules that are a little bit different from ranged combat. To attack with a close combat weapon, your model must be within 3 inches of at least one model in the target unit. You can see here these Grim Reapers are actually all in range of at least one model in this target unit, so all of them will be able to use their close combat weapons. Now, a funny thing is there's technically no vertical limit to this. It doesn't matter if the target is also on a higher or lower elevation, so long as it's horizontally within 3 inches. Now, the rules do say, if players decide, they may wish to agree that certain elevations would be unrealistic to make close combat attacks from. For instance, this zombie is still 3 inches horizontally away from this Grim Reaper. But again, the players may decide at this elevation it would be unrealistic for them to be in close combat. Also, it's important to note that cover does nothing to prevent damage from a close combat weapon. So these barrels would not shield a zombie. So using a unit card this time, we can see that the Rocket Punch against a soldier, armor 2 level, does a total of 2 dice per attack. And since all 3 of them are within range, we're going to be able to roll 6 dice. So rolling it up, the Grim Reaper's got 3 potential hits, which we now convert to damage. Each potential hit is 1 damage with those rocket punches. But, of course, we get to do an armor roll for the zombies. They get 2 dice, and they were able to negate 1 of the points of damage. Now here's the funny thing. Range only impacts which of the attacking models can participate in the attack, not who can take damage. So if the defender wanted, he could assign 1 point of damage to this zombie, and 1 point of damage to this zombie, which is actually outside of close combat range with these models. So I was talking to my pal Alex about this. He runs the Unit Forward site. It's a fan site for Dust. You should definitely check it out. And the way he jokingly explained this outcome is that the zombie up close, of course, got rocket punched, and the zombie at the back just died of shock. Now, he was just kidding around. A more serious way of looking at it is to stop thinking of these models as being static on the battlefield. Instead, they're all moving around. So the way I look at it is this model at the back, it rushed forward during the close combat, perhaps to try to defend his zombie brother, and paid dearly for it with a rocket punch to the face. So the 2 models get removed, and as a final step, because potential hits were rolled, that means we're going to have to add another suppression token to this unit. Another thing to keep in mind, just because I'm in close combat range doesn't mean I have to use my close combat weapons. Instead, these Grim Reapers could have fired with their much more powerful Victory MGs. And that would have allowed them to roll 12 dice, so why would they ever use their close combat weapons? The honest answer is that against most soldiers and some vehicles, you would always pick the Victory MG because you get to roll more dice. However, notice, soldiers with an armor class rating of 4 you won't be able to attack with the Victory MG. There's no stat here. And several of the vehicles are the same way. So in that situation, you're going to have to resort to your close combat weapons. All right, one last thing. Remember when we talked about movement, I said if you had two actions, a unit could combine them to do a march move. If a unit has two actions, it cannot do two separate attack actions, but again, it can combine them to do a sustained fire. And this allows you, after you've rolled dice for potential hits, you can then re-roll any of the dice once. I recommend you re-roll the misses. Okay, well that's it for this episode. We have covered ranged fire and close combat. I want to thank Alex from the website Unit Forward. Please check it out. I'll put a link in the description below. And a special thanks to Norman Mueller, James Palmer, and Apollo over at Board Game Geek, who answered a few questions I had to help me get ready for this episode. Until the next episode, thanks for watching.